The sun beat down mercilessly on the sprawling Texas prairie as Katherine Wells stumbled forward, her once pristine blue dress now torn and covered with dust. Her parched lips cracked as she tried to call for help, but no sound escaped her throat. The caravan had left her behind after the attack, whether by accident or design, she would never know. Katherine's vision blurred as she staggered across the endless sea of golden grass. The year was 1875, and the West Texas frontier remained as unforgiving as it was beautiful. 3 days without adequate water had taken their toll. Her thoughts became fragmented, memories of Boston society life mingling with hallucinations of flowing streams and cool shade. Just a little further, she whispered to herself, though she had no destination in mind. The scorching June heat shimmered across the landscape, distorting the horizon and her sense of reality. Katherine's knees buckled, and she collapsed into the scratchy prairie grass, her consciousness fading as dark spots danced across her vision. Miles away, Lucas Yates adjusted his well-worn Stetson hat against the glaring sun. The 30-year-old rancher had spent the morning tracking a stray from his small herd, following hoof prints that led him farther from his modest homestead than he'd intended. He'd built that ranch from nothing over the past 5 years, and every single head of cattle mattered. He squinted at something unusual in the distance, a splash of faded blue against the golden prairie. Lucas urged his chestnut mare forward, curiosity piqued. As he drew closer, his heart began to race. Not something, someone. Sweet Jesus, he muttered, dismounting before his horse had fully stopped. He rushed to the crumpled form of a young woman, her auburn hair falling loose from what had once been an elegant updo. Her skin was angry red from sun exposure, her breathing shallow. Lucas knelt beside her, gently turning her face toward him. She was alive, but barely. Her skin burned hot to the touch, and her lips were cracked and bleeding. He'd seen the effects of prairie heat before she was deep in the throes of delirium and dehydration. "Miss, can you hear me?" he asked, knowing she was too far gone to respond. Without hesitation, Lucas scooped the unconscious woman into his arms. She was lighter than she should be, a worrying sign. He managed to mount his horse while holding her, positioning her carefully across his lap. "Hang on, miss," he murmured, though she couldn't hear him. "There's water not far from here." Lucas urged his horse forward, riding as quickly as he dared while supporting the woman's limp form. The creek that ran through his property was less than a mile away, crystal-clear water fed by an underground spring. It had been the reason he'd chosen this patch of land to begin with. The woman stirred slightly in his arms, mumbling incoherently. Lucas tightened his grip, worry etched across his sun-weathered face. He'd seen men die from less exposure than she'd endured. The fact that she was still breathing at all spoke to a remarkable strength hidden beneath her delicate appearance. As they approached the creek, Lucas dismounted carefully, lifting the woman down before securing his horse to a nearby cottonwood. He carried her directly to the water's edge, settling her gently on the soft bank. "Here we go," he said softly, dipping his bandana into the cool water. With gentle movements, he pressed the damp cloth to her forehead, her cheeks, her cracked lips. "Take it slow now." Katherine felt something wonderfully cool against her burning skin. She struggled to open her eyes, but they felt weighted down. A voice, deep, unfamiliar, murmured reassurances she couldn't quite comprehend. The sensation of moisture against her lips triggered a desperate thirst. "Water," she managed to croak, her first coherent word in hours. "That's it," the voice encouraged. "I'm going to help you sit up just a little. You need to drink, but only small sips at first." Strong arms lifted her shoulders, and Katherine felt something press against her lips, a bandana soaked with blessed water. She drew in the moisture eagerly, wanting more. "Easy now," the voice cautioned. "Too much at once will make you sick." Katherine forced her eyes open, blinking against the harsh light. A man's face gradually came into focus, tanned skin, concerned eyes the color of the summer sky, and a strong jawline softened by a few days' worth of stubble. A stranger, but somehow she felt no fear. "Who?" She tried, her voice failing her. "Lucas Yates, madam. Found you about a mile east of here, collapsed in the prairie. You're safe now. Katherine attempted to nod, but even that small movement sent pain shooting through her head. She closed her eyes again, surrendering to the careful ministrations of her rescuer. Lucas continued to help her take small sips of water, alternating with cooling her burned skin. After nearly an hour of this patient care, Katherine's breathing had steadied and she seemed more aware of her surroundings. "Think you can tell me your name, miss?" Lucas asked, refilling his canteen from the creek. "Katherine," she whispered. "Katherine Wells." "Well, Miss Wells, you've had a mighty close call. Once you're stable enough to ride, I'll take you to my cabin. It's not much, but it's got shade and a proper bed." Katherine's eyes widened slightly. "Your cabin?" Lucas recognized the concern in her voice immediately. Even on the frontier, proprieties had to be observed. A single woman alone with an unknown man would be scandalous in any circumstance. "No need to worry," he assured her. "I've got neighbors not far the Hendersons. Martha Henderson can come stay while you recover. We do things proper out here, despite what you might have heard about the frontier." Relief softened Katherine's features, though wariness remained in her eyes. "Thank you," she said simply. "Can you tell me what happened, how you came to be alone out here?" Katherine's brow furrowed as she tried to piece together the fragmented memories. "I was traveling with a wagon train from El Paso to Austin. There was an attack, not Indians, but bandits, I think. Everything happened so quickly." Her voice trembled. "The wagon I was in. It broke an axle during the chaos. They said they would come back for me, but..." Tears welled in her eyes. "They left you behind," Lucas finished grimly. He'd heard of such things happening before in the panic following an attack. People sometimes made decisions that haunted them later. "If they lived to be haunted, that is. How long ago was this?" 3 days, perhaps. I tried to follow on foot, but I lost the trail." Katherine closed her eyes. "I had a small canteen, but it emptied by yesterday morning." Lucas shook his head in disbelief. 3 days in this heat with minimal water, it was a miracle she was alive at all. "Well, Miss Wells, you won't be following that wagon train anymore today. Let's get you to shelter before the afternoon heat gets worse." With gentle care, Lucas helped Katherine to her feet. She swayed dangerously, and he caught her before she could fall. "I'm afraid you'll have to ride with me," he said. "Can you manage that?" Katherine nodded weakly. "I have no alternative, Mr. Yates." Lucas helped her onto his horse before mounting behind her. He kept one arm securely around her waist as they rode at a gentle pace toward his homestead. Katherine leaned back against his chest, too exhausted to maintain propriety. The steady rhythm of the horse's gait and the solid presence of the man behind her lulled her into a state between wakefulness and sleep. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to believe she might survive. Lucas's cabin came into view, a modest but well-built structure nestled against a small rise, with a corral and barn nearby. A vegetable garden thrived along one side, and several chickens pecked at the ground near the porch. "Home," Lucas said simply, bringing his horse to a stop. Katherine roused herself enough to take in her surroundings. "It's lovely," she murmured, and meant it. After days in the merciless open prairie, the humble homestead looked like paradise. Lucas dismounted first, then reached up to help Katherine down. Her legs gave way as soon as her feet touched the ground, and he caught her, lifting her effortlessly into his arms once more. "Sorry," she whispered, embarrassment coloring her sunburned cheeks. "Nothing to be sorry for," Lucas replied, carrying her toward the cabin. "You're lucky to be conscious at all after what you've been through." Inside, the cabin was simple but tidy, one main room with a stone fireplace, a table with 2 chairs, a small kitchen area, and a curtained-off sleeping space. Lucas carried Katherine to the bed behind the curtain and set her down gently. "Rest here," he instructed. "I'll ride over to the Hendersons' place and bring Martha back. Their farm is about 3 miles west." Katherine nodded weakly, already feeling sleep pulling at her. "Thank you, Mr. Yates. I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness." A small smile tugged at Lucas's lips. "No need for that. Anyone would have done the same." But as Lucas rode toward his neighbor's homestead, he couldn't help thinking that wasn't entirely true. The frontier bred both the best and worst in people. Some would have ridden past, unwilling to take on the burden of a half-dead stranger. Others might have helped but demanded payment in one form or another. Lucas had never been able to turn away from someone in need, a trait his late father had called both his greatest strength and his greatest weakness. Martha Henderson was a stout, no-nonsense woman in her 50s who had helped birth most of the children in the scattered community. She listened to Lucas's explanation with growing concern, then immediately began packing a small bag. "John," she called to her husband, who was working in their barn. "Lucas found a woman near dead on the prairie. I'm going to his place to tend to her." John Henderson, a tall man with a shock of white hair, emerged from the barn. "Need any help, Lucas? Just your wife's healing skills and her good reputation," Lucas replied with a slight smile. John laughed. "Take both with my blessing. Should I come by later, if you don't mind?" She mentioned bandits attacking her wagon train. Might be good to spread word, keep folks alert. Martha climbed onto her sturdy pinto with Lucas's help. Always something, isn't there? Just when you think the frontier's settling down. They rode back to Lucas's cabin, Martha asking practical questions about Katherine's condition. By the time they arrived, Lucas had given her all the information he had, which wasn't much. Katherine was still sleeping when they entered the cabin. Martha shooed Lucas outside while she examined the young woman more thoroughly, changing her into one of Lucas's clean shirts as a makeshift nightgown. Lucas busied himself with chores, trying not to worry about the stranger he'd rescued. Something about her had affected him deeply, perhaps her determination to survive against impossible odds, or the trust in her eyes when she'd first looked at him. After what seemed like hours, Martha emerged from the cabin. "She'll live," she announced without preamble, though it was a near thing. Another few hours in that sun. She left the sentence unfinished. "She's suffering from heat exhaustion, dehydration, and those sunburns will be painful for days, but she's young and seems strong." Relief washed through Lucas. "Thank you, Martha. I'll stay tonight, but I'll need to go home tomorrow for a spell. John can't cook worth a lick, and I've got the chickens to tend. I can come back after." "I appreciate it. I know it's an imposition." Martha waved away his concern. "Neighbors help neighbors. That's how we survive out here." She looked at him shrewdly. "She's a pretty one, isn't she?" Lucas felt a flush creeping up his neck that had nothing to do with the Texas sun. "I hadn't noticed," he lied. Martha's laugh told him she didn't believe him for a moment. "Well, I'm going to fix something for us to eat. She'll need broth and soft foods when she wakes." Inside, Katherine stirred as the aroma of cooking food filled the small cabin. She opened her eyes to see an unfamiliar woman stirring something on the stove. "Hello," she called weakly. The woman turned, her lined face breaking into a warm smile. "Ah, there you are. I'm Martha Henderson, neighbor to Mr. Yates. How are you feeling, dear?" "Like I've been trampled by cattle," Katherine admitted, trying to sit up. Martha hurried over to help her, adjusting pillows behind her back. "Not surprising. You've had quite an ordeal from what Lucas tells me." "Lucas," Katherine repeated. "Mr. Yates, he saved my life." "That he did. He's a good man, our Lucas." Martha handed Katherine a cup of water. "Small sips, mind you," Katherine obeyed, savoring the cool liquid. "Where is he?" "Outside, tending to his chores. He's been worried about you, checking in every half hour to see if you'd woken." A strange warmth that had nothing to do with her sunburn spread through Katherine's chest. "He's been very kind. That's his nature," Martha replied. "Now, think you could manage some broth? You need to build your strength." Katherine nodded, suddenly aware of a gnawing hunger. "Yes, please." Martha brought her a bowl of fragrant chicken broth. Katherine's hands shook as she tried to hold the spoon, and Martha gently took it from her. "Let me help just this once," she said, bringing the spoon to Katherine's lips. "Tomorrow you can feed yourself, I promise." Katherine accepted the help gratefully, too weak to feel embarrassed. After finishing half the bowl, she leaned back, exhausted by even this small effort. "Rest now," Martha instructed. "I'll be right here if you need anything." Katherine's eyes were already closing. "Thank you," she murmured. Outside, Lucas finished his evening chores with more care than usual. He fed his small herd of cattle, checked his 2 horses, and made sure the chicken coop was secure against predators. All the while, his thoughts kept returning to the woman in his bed. Katherine Wells wasn't from these parts. That much was clear from her accent and the quality of her clothing, tattered though it was. He wondered what had brought her west and where she had been headed before disaster struck. When he finally returned to the cabin, Martha met him at the door. She woke and took some broth, she reported. Went right back to sleep after. Poor thing's exhausted, but I think she'll be much improved by morning. Lucas nodded, relief evident on his face. Good, that's good. Martha studied him with knowing eyes. I made up a pallet for you by the fireplace. I'll sleep in the chair. No need for that, Martha. Take my bed, I mean the bed. I'll be fine on the floor. Martha patted his arm. Always the gentleman. Your mother raised you right. They ate a simple dinner of beans, cornbread, and bacon, keeping their voices low. Lucas found himself glancing toward the curtained-off area more often than necessary, though Katherine remained asleep. Later, lying on his pallet near the dying embers of the fire, Lucas stared at the ceiling, sleep eluding him. What would become of Katherine Wells once she recovered? She had mentioned Austin as her destination, but that was still more than 200 miles away. Would she try to continue her journey? The thought of her leaving stirred an unexpected disquiet in his chest. Lucas pushed the feeling aside. He barely knew the woman, and she certainly hadn't come west looking for a rancher with modest prospects. Whatever her story, whatever her plans, his duty was simply to help her recover. Nothing more. Yet as sleep finally claimed him, his last thoughts were of auburn hair and eyes that somehow reminded him of the deep pools in the creek where he'd first helped her drink. Morning brought a gentle rain, a rare blessing in the summer heat. Katherine woke to the soft patter on the cabin's wooden roof, momentarily disoriented before remembering where she was and how she had come to be there. She felt stronger, though her skin still burned and her head ached dully. Carefully, she pushed herself up to sitting, taking stock of her situation. Someone, Mrs. Henderson, presumably had dressed her in a man's shirt that hung to her knees. Her own clothes were nowhere to be seen. Good morning, came Martha's cheerful voice as she pushed aside the curtain. Thought I heard you stirring. How are you feeling today? Much better, thank you, Katherine replied, her voice still scratchy but stronger than the day before. Though I seem to be lacking proper attire, Martha chuckled. Your dress was fit for nothing but rags, I'm afraid. I've washed it, but it needs mending something fierce. I brought one of my dresses for you to wear in the meantime, though it'll be a bit large. She held up a simple calico dress, practical and well-worn but clean. That's very kind of you, Katherine said sincerely. I don't know what I would have done without your help, yours and Mr. Yates's. Speaking of Lucas, he's already been out tending to his stock, rain or no rain. Man never rests. Martha helped Katherine stand, steadying her when she swayed slightly. Think you can manage a trip outside to the necessary? Then we'll get you dressed and fed. Katherine nodded, determined to regain her independence as quickly as possible. With Martha's help, she made her way outside, the cool rain a blessing on her sunburned skin. By the time they returned to the cabin, Lucas had come in from his chores, water dripping from his hat and coat. He stopped short when he saw Katherine standing, his eyes widening slightly before a smile spread across his face. Miss Wells, you're looking much improved. Katherine felt a blush rising in her cheeks. Thanks to your timely rescue, Mr. Yates. An awkward silence fell until Martha cleared her throat. Lucas, step outside while I help Miss Wells dress, would you? Of course, he said quickly, grabbing his hat and retreating. Once dressed in Martha's too large dress, which had been hastily pinned to fit better, Katherine felt more herself. Martha helped her to a chair at the table, where Lucas joined them for a breakfast of oatmeal and dried apple slices. Miss Wells, Lucas began, I was hoping you might tell us more about your situation. Where were you headed before the incident? Katherine stirred her oatmeal thoughtfully. I was traveling to Austin to take up a position as a teacher. I came from Boston originally. Boston, Martha exclaimed. My stars, that's quite a journey. Yes, well, circumstances necessitated a change. Something in Katherine's tone discouraged further questions on that subject. I had arranged to join the wagon train in El Paso. We were a week into our journey when the bandits attacked. Did they take much? Lucas asked. Whatever they could carry quickly: money, jewelry, some provisions. They killed 2 men who tried to fight back. Catherine's hands trembled slightly at the memory. When my wagon broke its axle, the leader, Mr. Collins, said they needed to keep moving to reach safer ground. He promised to send help back for me, but they never came, Lucas finished grimly. Perhaps they meant to, Katherine said charitably, but after 3 days I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I started walking, following the wagon tracks as best I could. I had a small canteen, but it emptied quickly in this heat. It's a miracle you survived, Martha said, patting Catherine's hand. Thanks to Mr. Yates, I did. Katherine looked directly at Lucas, her eyes conveying a depth of gratitude words couldn't express. Lucas cleared his throat, uncomfortable with her praise. Anyone would have done the same, but they didn't, Katherine said softly. You did. The intensity of her gaze made Lucas look away. Well, the question now is what comes next. Austin is still a fair journey from here. There's a stagecoach that passes through Alpine once a week, Martha offered, but not for another 5 days. Catherine's shoulders slumped slightly. I'm afraid most of my money was in my trunk on the wagon. You can stay here until you're fully recovered, Lucas said immediately. We can figure out the rest later. I couldn't impose, it's no imposition, he insisted. I have the space and Martha has kindly agreed to stay as chaperone. Actually, Martha interjected, I need to head home after breakfast to tend to things there, but I'll be back this evening. A look of concern crossed Catherine's face. Don't worry, Martha assured her. Lucas is a perfect gentleman and I'll only be gone a few hours. My husband John will be coming by as well. Katherine nodded, though she still seemed uncomfortable with the arrangement. Propriety was important, even perhaps especially on the frontier. After breakfast, Martha prepared to leave, giving Katherine strict instructions to rest and drink plenty of water. Once she had gone, an awkward silence filled the small cabin. I should let you rest, Lucas said, reaching for his hat. I have chores to attend to, Mr. Yates, Katherine called as he reached the door. I truly cannot thank you enough. Lucas paused, turning back to look at her. The morning light filtering through the window caught in her auburn hair, creating a halo effect that made his breath catch. You're welcome, Miss Wells, he said simply, and stepped outside before she could see the effect she had on him. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a freshness in the air that would soon disappear as the sun climbed higher. Lucas busied himself with ranch work, checking his small herd for signs of illness, mending a section of fence that had begun to sag, and tending to his vegetable garden. Inside the cabin, Katherine rested as instructed, but her mind was active. She needed to formulate a plan. Austin was still her destination, but how would she get there with almost no money? The teaching position would provide a salary, but she needed to arrive first. Moreover, she couldn't help wondering about the man who had saved her life. Lucas Yates was unlike any man she had known in Boston society, straightforward, unpretentious, and seemingly without ulterior motives. His kindness toward a stranger spoke of a character seldom found in her previous circles. By midday, Katherine felt strong enough to move around the cabin. She examined her surroundings more carefully. The sturdy furniture Lucas must have built himself, the small bookshelf containing a surprising number of volumes, the neat arrangement of his modest possessions. Everything spoke of a man who took pride in his home, humble though it was. When Lucas came in for the midday meal, he found Katherine examining one of his books. You like Shakespeare? He asked, sounding surprised. Katherine looked up, a smile lighting her face. Very much. I didn't expect to find The Tempest in a Texas cabin. Lucas shrugged, a hint of defensiveness in his posture. Just because I work with my hands doesn't mean I don't value what's in my head. I meant no offense, Katherine said quickly. I'm impressed, truly. Many of my acquaintances in Boston owned books merely for show. Lucas's expression softened. My mother was a schoolteacher before she married my father. She brought her love of books west with her and passed it on to me. Katherine asked gently. They both passed 5 years ago. Influenza. His voice held old grief, well contained but still present. I'm sorry, Katherine said sincerely. My parents are gone as well. My father 2 years ago, my mother when I was a child. Lucas nodded, recognizing the shared understanding of loss. Are you hungry? I can fix us something simple. Please, let me help, Katherine insisted. I've been idle all morning while you worked. Lucas hesitated, then nodded. Together they prepared a meal of cornbread and leftover beans. Katherine moved slowly, still weak from her ordeal but determined to contribute. As they ate, Lucas asked, "How did you come to be a teacher?" I attended the normal school in Boston. Teaching seemed a natural choice. I've always loved learning, and I needed a respectable profession. A shadow crossed her face momentarily. Lucas noticed but didn't pry. And what brought you west? Boston to Austin is quite a change. Katherine set down her spoon, considering how much to share. After my father died, I discovered his finances were not as sound as he had led everyone to believe. There were debts, significant ones. She took a breath. An older gentleman, a friend of my father's, offered marriage as a solution. He was kind enough, but not someone you could love, Lucas finished. Katherine looked at him, surprised by his perception. Yes, when I saw the advertisement for teachers in Austin, it seemed like providence. A chance to make my own way, far from the gossip and expectations of Boston society. Lucas nodded thoughtfully. It takes courage to leave everything familiar behind, or desperation, Katherine countered with a small smile. Often they go hand in hand out here, Lucas said. Most of us came west running from something or chasing after something else. And which were you, Mr. Yates? Lucas considered the question. Both, I suppose. After my parents died, the family farm in Missouri held too many memories. I wanted open country, a fresh start. Something that would be entirely my own. Katherine looked around the cabin with new appreciation. And you've built all this yourself, from the ground up, Lucas confirmed, a note of pride in his voice. It's not much compared to what you're used to. It's wonderful, Katherine interrupted sincerely. Truly, there's something honest about it that many grand Boston homes lacked. Their eyes met across the table, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them. Lucas was the first to look away, clearing his throat. You should rest again after eating, he said. Your body needs time to recover. Katherine nodded, though she longed to continue their conversation. Something about Lucas Yates intrigued her, his contradictions, his quiet strength, the glimpses of intelligence and sensitivity behind his practical exterior. After the meal, Katherine returned to the bed while Lucas went back to his chores. She tried to rest as instructed, but her mind kept returning to her situation. She had no illusions about the precariousness of her position alone, nearly penniless, dependent on the kindness of strangers. Yet somehow, she felt safer in this simple cabin than she had in the last months in her father's house in Boston, with creditors circling and Mr. Harrington's increasingly persistent attention. When Katherine woke from a light doze, the angle of sunlight through the window suggested late afternoon. She heard voices outside. Lucas's deep tones mixed with an unfamiliar male voice. Carefully, she rose and smoothed down Martha's borrowed dress, then made her way to the door. On the porch, Lucas stood talking with a tall, white-haired man who could only be John Henderson. "Ah, Miss Wells," the older man said warmly when he noticed her. "Glad to see you up and about. John Henderson at your service. Pleased to meet you, Mr. Henderson. Thank you for allowing your wife to help care for me." "Happy to do it," John replied. "Martha would have had my hide if I'd suggested otherwise. She loves nothing more than nursing someone back to health, says I don't give her enough practice by staying disgustingly healthy all these years." Katherine laughed, warming to the man's good humor. "She's been wonderfully kind. She'll be along shortly," John assured her. "Just finishing up some baking for you folks." "That's not necessary. Try telling Martha that," John chuckled. "She's convinced young Lucas here would starve without her occasional food deliveries." Lucas rolled his eyes good-naturedly. "I managed just fine for years before you two moved in nearby. Managed, yes. Thrived, debatable." John winked at Katherine. "Now, Lucas has been filling me in on your situation, Miss Wells. Terrible business with that wagon train." "Yes," Katherine agreed, her smile fading. "I've been trying to determine what to do next." "Well, you're welcome to stay with us if you'd prefer a woman's company," John offered. Our place is smaller than Lucas's, but we've got a spare corner. That's very kind, Katherine said, but I wouldn't want to displace you from your home. You wouldn't be, and I've already imposed enough on everyone's hospitality, she continued. Once I'm fully recovered, I need to find a way to continue to Austin. Lucas, who had been silent during this exchange, spoke up. There's no rush, Miss Wells. You're welcome here as long as needed. The sincerity in his voice made Katherine look at him with gratitude. Thank you, Mr. Yates. I won't forget your kindness. John glanced between them, a knowing look in his eyes that made Lucas shift uncomfortably. Well, the older man said, I should head back and see what's keeping Martha. You two young folks behave yourselves until we return. Despite his teasing tone, there was a seriousness in his eyes. Frontier society had its rules, and he was gently reminding them. After John left, Katherine and Lucas sat on the porch, watching the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the prairie. The day's heat was beginning to dissipate, bringing the promise of a cooler evening. Your neighbors are wonderful people, Katherine commented. Salt of the earth, Lucas agreed. When they moved here 2 years ago, they adopted me like a stray pup. Martha's forever bringing food, and John helps with the bigger ranch projects. You're fortunate to have them. I am, Lucas acknowledged. Neighbors matter out here. We're too far from towns and law to survive without helping each other. Katherine nodded thoughtfully. It's different from the city where you can live for years without knowing who lives next door. Would you miss it? City life? Lucas asked, genuinely curious. Katherine considered the question. Some aspects, perhaps, the libraries, the music. But not the artifice, the constant social maneuvering. She looked out at the vast landscape before them. There's an honesty to this place that's refreshing. Lucas studied her profile, struck by her perception. Most Eastern women he'd encountered viewed the frontier as a primitive hardship to be endured, not appreciated. It's not always easy, he cautioned. Winters can be harsh, summers brutal, nature doesn't care about human comfort. Like yesterday, Katherine said softly, when you found me. Lucas nodded solemnly. Like yesterday. I keep thinking about those moments before you arrived, Katherine admitted. I was so certain I was going to die there alone. I'd made peace with it, in a way, and then suddenly there you were. She turned to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Like an answer to a prayer I hadn't even known I was making. The naked emotion in her voice caught Lucas off guard. He was saved from having to respond by the sound of a wagon approaching Martha and John returning as promised. The evening passed pleasantly, with Martha fussing over Katherine's still evident sunburn, and John regaling them with stories of his days as a Texas Ranger. Katherine laughed more than she had in months, feeling a growing comfort with these people who had so readily taken her into their lives. After a hearty supper, Martha announced she would be staying the night again, while John would return home to tend to their farm. I'll be back tomorrow, John promised as he prepared to leave, bringing a surprise for you, Miss Wells. A surprise? Katherine asked curiously. You'll see, he replied with a twinkle in his eye. Nothing fancy, mind you, but something I think you'll appreciate. After John departed, Martha shooed Lucas outside to finish his evening chores while she helped Katherine prepare for bed. The older woman applied a soothing salve to Katherine's sunburn, her touch gentle despite her brisk manner. You're healing well, she observed. Another day or two of rest and you'll be right as rain. Thank you for all your care, Mrs. Henderson, Katherine said sincerely. I don't know how I'll ever repay you and your husband or Mr. Yates. Martha waved away her thanks. Out here, we don't keep ledgers of favors owed. You help when help's needed, that's all. She paused, studying Katherine's face. He likes you, you know. Katherine felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with sunburn. Mr. Yates has been very kind, not just kind, Martha interrupted gently. I've known that boy for 2 years now, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching. Katherine didn't know how to respond. She'd noticed Lucas's occasional glances, of course, but had attributed them to natural curiosity about the stranger in his home. I hardly know him, she protested weakly. Sometimes knowing comes quick out here, Martha replied. Life's too short and too hard for the drawn-out courtship city folks' favor. I'm not looking for courtship, Katherine said, perhaps too quickly. I have a position waiting in Austin. Martha gave her a knowing smile. Plans change, dear, Lord knows mine did. I was heading to California with my first husband when he died of cholera in Kansas. Met John 3 months later, and we've been together 30 years now. Katherine absorbed this information silently. She couldn't deny a growing fondness for Lucas Yates, but romantic notions seemed foolish given her circumstances. I think you're misinterpreting Mr. Yates's concern, she said finally. He would have done the same for anyone in my situation. Perhaps, Martha conceded. But I don't think just anyone would have him bringing in wildflowers for the table or wearing his good shirt to supper. Katherine hadn't noticed these details, but now that Martha mentioned them, she recalled the fresh flowers that had appeared on the table that morning, and the slightly less worn quality of Lucas's shirt at dinner. Before she could formulate a response, Lucas returned from his chores, and the conversation necessarily ended. But Martha's words stayed with Katherine as she lay in bed that night, listening to the soft sounds of Lucas setting up his pallet by the fireplace, and Martha settling into the rocking chair she insisted was perfectly comfortable for sleeping. Could Martha be right? And if so, what did it mean for her plans, her future? Katherine had come west seeking independence, not entanglement. Yet she couldn't deny the flutter in her chest when Lucas smiled at her or the comfort she found in his steady presence. Sleep came slowly that night, her dreams a confused mixture of Boston drawing rooms, scorching prairie heat, and a pair of clear blue eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. The next morning brought another surprise. Katherine awoke, feeling significantly stronger. The worst of her dehydration and heat exhaustion had passed, though her sunburned skin still smarted. She found she could move about the cabin with growing confidence, eager to be useful rather than a burden. Martha observed her improved condition with approval. "You're coming along nicely." "Good, strong constitution, just as I thought." Lucas had already gone out for his morning chores, but the small signs of his presence were everywhere: fresh coffee on the stove, kindling neatly stacked by the fireplace, and yes, new wildflowers in the simple tin can on the table. Katherine helped Martha prepare breakfast, grateful for the activity. By the time Lucas returned, she had set the table and was stirring a pot of oatmeal with growing confidence. He stopped in the doorway, surprise evident on his face. "You shouldn't be up working." "I'm much better today," Katherine assured him, "and I'm tired of being useless." "You're not," Lucas began, but Martha cut him off. "Let the girl help, Lucas. Lying abed all day would drive anyone crazy, especially someone used to being active." Lucas relented, though concern still creased his brow. He washed up at the basin by the door before joining them at the table. "I thought we might go into town today," he said as they ate. "If you're feeling up to it, Miss Wells. You'll need some things of your own, and there might be news of your wagon train." Katherine's heart leaped at the possibility. "Do you think someone might have reported the attack?" "It's possible," Lucas replied cautiously. "Alpine's the nearest settlement of any size. If anyone came looking for survivors or to report the incident, they'd likely go there." "I'd like that very much," Katherine said eagerly. "How far is it?" "About 10 miles. We take the wagon, make it easier on you." Martha nodded her approval. "A good idea." "I'll come along, need to pick up a few things myself." The trip into town was planned for after the morning chores. Katherine changed back into her own dress, which Martha had mended as best she could. It was still stained and somewhat tattered, but presentable enough for a frontier town. John arrived as promised, carrying a bundle wrapped in burlap. "Here's that surprise I mentioned," he announced, presenting it to Katherine with a flourish. She unwrapped it to find a pair of sturdy leather boots, smaller than she would have expected for a man John's size. "They were my daughter's," John explained, seeing her confusion. "She married a rancher up in Colorado 2 years back, left these behind, said the altitude called for different footwear, whatever that means. They look about your size." Katherine was touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. Her own city shoes had been ruined by her Prairie ordeal. "Mr. Henderson, this is so kind. Are you certain your daughter wouldn't mind? Sarah's got no use for them, and she'd be the first to say you should have them. Try them on. Martha added some extra padding to make them fit better. The boots were slightly large but comfortable with the added padding. Katherine walked around experimentally, marveling at their practicality compared to her previous footwear. "They're perfect," she declared. "Thank you so much." "You'll need proper boots if you're staying in Texas," John said with a wink toward Lucas, who suddenly found something interesting to examine on the porch roof. Soon they were all loaded into Lucas's wagon, a simple but well-maintained vehicle pulled by two steady draft horses. Katherine sat on the bench seat between Lucas and Martha, acutely aware of Lucas's solid presence beside her. The road to Alpine was little more than a worn track across the prairie, but Lucas handled the wagon with practiced ease, avoiding the worst bumps to make the journey as comfortable as possible for Katherine. As they rode, Katherine took in the landscape with new appreciation. The vast expanse of prairie was dotted with mesquite trees and occasional rock formations, beautiful in a stark, uncompromising way. In the distance, mountains rose against the horizon, the Davis Mountains. Lucas informed her when she asked. "They're beautiful," Katherine said sincerely. "They are," Lucas agreed. "Especially in the evenings when the sun hits them just right, makes them look like they're on fire." Martha chuckled. Listen to the poet in him coming out, Lucas Yates, who would have thought? Lucas flushed slightly, but Katherine turned to him with genuine interest. "Do you write poetry, Mr. Yates?" "No, madam," he denied quickly. "Just appreciate beauty where I find it." His eyes lingered on her face a moment too long before returning to the road. Martha caught Katherine's eye with a knowing look that made Katherine blush and turn her attention firmly to the approaching town. Alpine was small by Eastern standards, but impressive for a frontier settlement. A main street lined with various businesses, a general store, a saloon, a small hotel, a blacksmith formed the heart of the community. People moved about their business with purpose, many stopping to stare curiously at the wagon as it passed. Lucas drew the wagon to a halt in front of the general store, jumping down to help Katherine descend. His hands lingered at her waist perhaps a moment longer than strictly necessary, a fact that did not escape Martha's notice, judging by her amused expression. "Mr. Yates," came a booming voice from the boardwalk. "Don't often see you in town twice in a month." Lucas turned to greet a portly man with impressive whiskers. "Mr. Thornton, just bringing Miss Wells to get some supplies." The man's curious gaze shifted to Katherine. "Miss Wells." "Don't believe I've had the pleasure." "Katherine Wells," she introduced herself, extending her hand which the man shook enthusiastically. "Howard Thornton, at your service, miss. I run the general store and serve as postmaster for Alpine." He lowered his voice conspiratorially. "Also unofficial town gossip, though my wife would dispute that title belongs to her." Katherine laughed, warming to his friendly manner. "Pleased to meet you, Mr. Thornton. Miss Wells was traveling with a wagon train that was attacked 3 days east of here," Lucas explained. "We were hoping there might be news if anyone reported the incident." Thornton's expression grew serious. "As a matter of fact, there was a report. 2 men from that very train came through yesterday looking for a missing woman." His eyes widened as he made the connection. "Would that be you, miss?" Katherine's heart leaped. "Yes, they came back for me. Came back and were mighty concerned when they couldn't find you. Said the wagon had broken down and they'd had to leave you with provisions while they got the others to safety. When they returned, you were gone." Relief and vindication washed through Katherine. They hadn't abandoned her after all. "Where are they now? Did they leave word where I might find them?" Thornton nodded. "Said they were continuing on to Austin as planned, but left a letter for you in case you found your way to civilization." "Wait right here, I'll fetch it." He hurried into his store, returning moments later with an envelope. "Here you are, miss, and may I say, you're looking remarkably well for someone who was lost on the prairie. Most don't survive such an ordeal." "I wouldn't have," Katherine said, glancing at Lucas. "If Mr. Yates hadn't found me when he did." "Our Lucas has a knack for being in the right place at the right time," Martha interjected proudly, as if he were her own son. Katherine opened the letter with trembling fingers, scanning the contents quickly. "They've continued on to Austin," she confirmed. Mr. Collins writes that they searched for me for nearly a day before reluctantly moving on. He's holding my trunk and remaining possessions for me there. She looked up, relief evident in her expression, and they left money for my passage. Lucas felt an unexpected twinge of disappointment at this news. That's fortunate, he said, striving to keep his tone neutral. When does the next stage coach pass through, Mr. Thornton? Day after tomorrow, the shopkeeper replied, heading straight to Austin as luck would have it. Katherine folded the letter carefully, her emotions mixed. On one hand, her path forward was suddenly clear again. She could continue to Austin as planned, take up her teaching position, begin the independent life she had envisioned. On the other hand, the thought of leaving Lucas's cabin, of saying goodbye to him and the Hendersons, created an ache she hadn't anticipated. Well, Martha said brightly, seemingly oblivious to the sudden tension, since you'll be staying a bit longer, let's get you some proper clothes and necessities. Can't have you traveling in that tattered dress. The shopping expedition that followed was both practical and, to Katherine's surprise, enjoyable. Martha guided her through selections with motherly efficiency, while Lucas insisted on contributing to the purchases, despite Katherine's protests that the money from the wagon master was sufficient. Consider it a loan if it makes you feel better, he said when she tried to refuse. You can repay me when you're settled in Austin. The way he said Austin made it sound impossibly far away, though it was only a few days' journey by stagecoach. Katherine finally relented, accepting his generosity with a promise to herself that she would indeed repay every cent once she received her first teacher's salary. By midday, Katherine had acquired 2 serviceable dresses, undergarments, a shawl, and various toiletries. The purchases were modest, but represented a significant improvement over her current situation. Now, Martha declared, I believe we've earned a proper meal. The hotel serves a decent lunch, and it would be nice for Miss Wells to sit at her real table for a change. No offense to your hospitality, Lucas. The hotel dining room was simple but clean, offering hearty frontier fare that tasted like a feast to Katherine after days of near starvation, followed by Martha's simple cooking. As they ate, various townspeople stopped by their table, curious about the newcomer and eager to hear her story. Katherine found herself recounting her ordeal multiple times, always emphasizing Lucas's timely rescue. Each telling made her more aware of how close she had come to death, and how much she owed the quiet rancher who sat beside her, uncomfortable with the attention her story brought him. After lunch, Lucas excused himself to check with the stagecoach office about tickets, leaving Katherine with Martha. The older woman took advantage of his absence to speak frankly. You like him, she stated without preamble. Katherine knew there was no point in pretending ignorance. He's a good man. Kind, intelligent, handsome, Martha added with a twinkle in her eye. Katherine couldn't help but smile. Yes, that too, but you're still planning to leave. It wasn't a question, but Katherine answered anyway. I must. I gave my word to the school board in Austin. They're expecting me, and teaching positions for women aren't so plentiful that I can afford to turn this one down. Martha studied her thoughtfully. Jobs come and go. Finding a good man, one who sees you clearly and values what he sees, that's rarer than you might think. I barely know him, Katherine protested. You know enough, Martha countered. You know he risked his life to save a stranger. You know he's opened his home without expectation of reward. You know he reads Shakespeare and notices wildflowers. What more do you need to know to at least consider the possibility? Katherine had no ready answer. The truth was, in the brief time she'd known Lucas Yates, she'd felt a connection unlike any she'd experienced before. But she'd left Boston specifically to escape pressure to marry for convenience rather than love. Could she really abandon her plans so quickly for feelings that might be nothing more than gratitude and proximity? I need to honor my commitments, she said finally. And I need to know I can stand on my own. Martha patted her hand gently. All admirable goals, dear. Just don't close doors before you've properly looked inside the rooms they lead to. Lucas returned before Katherine could respond, looking somewhat troubled. Is something wrong? Katherine asked. The stagecoach is full, he reported. Next one with space isn't for 2 weeks. Catherine's initial disappointment was quickly followed by a flutter of something that felt dangerously like relief. 2 weeks. But my letter to the school board said I would arrive by the end of the month. The station manager said you could try standby. Sometimes passengers don't show up. Lucas hesitated. Or I could take you. Take me, Katherine repeated, surprised, to Austin. I have a light wagon that could make the journey in 4, maybe 5 days if the weather holds. The offer seemed to surprise Lucas himself, judging by his expression. Martha watched this exchange with barely concealed delight. What a splendid idea. John and I could watch your ranch while you're gone. Lucas nodded slowly. It would be faster than waiting for the next available stagecoach. Katherine was momentarily speechless. The offer was incredibly generous, yet she hesitated to accept it. 5 days alone on the trail with Lucas, even with the purest of intentions, would raise eyebrows in any society. I appreciate the offer more than I can say, she began carefully, but I wouldn't want to be the cause of gossip that might harm your reputation in the community. Lucas looked confused for a moment, then understanding dawned. Oh, well, we could ask Martha to come along as chaperone. Martha shook her head quickly. I'm afraid that's impossible. John's knee has been acting up something terrible. He needs me at home. This was news to Katherine, who had seen John moving quite spryly that very morning. Perhaps I should simply wait for the next stagecoach, Katherine suggested, though the thought of 2 more weeks in Alpine, 2 more weeks in Lucas's company, sent an unexpected thrill through her. Nonsense, Martha declared. Lucas's idea is perfectly sensible. We'll just need to make sure everything is proper. She thought for a moment. I know, you could travel with the Millers. They're heading to San Antonio day after tomorrow, and their route would take them most of the way to Austin. Sarah Miller is about your age. Katherine, you'd have female companionship, and Lucas would have help if there's trouble. Lucas considered this. Jacob Miller is a good man. He'd be welcome company on the trail. Katherine felt a complex mix of emotions at this solution: relief that propriety would be maintained, disappointment at the loss of private time with Lucas, and growing excitement about the journey itself. That sounds like an excellent arrangement, she said finally, if the Millers are amenable. Let's find out, Martha said, rising from the table. They usually come into town on market day. The Millers were indeed in Alpine, their wagon loaded with produce from their farm. Sarah Miller, a cheerful young woman with a ready smile, was delighted at the prospect of female company for the journey. The trip gets mighty dull with just Pa and my brothers for conversation, she confided to Katherine. We'd be pleased to have you join us. With the travel arrangements settled, Katherine felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She would reach Austin in time to begin her teaching position, and the journey there would be safer and more pleasant than a crowded stagecoach. Yet as they prepared to return to Lucas's ranch, she found herself watching him as he helped Martha into the wagon, noting the easy strength in his movements, the gentle way he handled the horses, the quiet confidence he exuded without arrogance. For the first time, she allowed herself to truly contemplate what it might mean to stay in this place, with this man. The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. What did she really know about Lucas Yates, beyond his kindness and the glimpses of intelligence and sensitivity she'd observed? What did he know of her, beyond her current desperate circumstances? Could anything meaningful grow from such brief acquaintance? Martha's words echoed in her mind. Sometimes knowing comes quick out here. The return journey to the ranch was quieter than the morning's trip had been. Katherine was lost in thought, Lucas seemed preoccupied, and even Martha was uncharacteristically silent. The only sounds were the creak of the wagon wheels and the steady clop of the horses' hooves against the hard-packed earth. As they approached the ranch, the setting sun cast long shadows across the prairie, painting the landscape in shades of gold and amber. Katherine found herself memorizing the scene, storing it away like a precious keepsake. "It's beautiful," she said softly, breaking the long silence. Lucas glanced at her, then followed her gaze to the golden prairie stretching toward the distant mountains. "It is," he agreed. "Never tire of that view. I can see why." Katherine turned to look at him directly. "Thank you for offering to take me to Austin, Mr. Yates." "It's extraordinarily kind." Lucas kept his eyes on the road, but a faint color rose in his cheeks. "Least I could do." Martha made a small noise that might have been a suppressed laugh or a cough. "Lucas never does just the least he could do. It's not in his nature." The evening passed quietly. John joined them for supper, bringing news that the Millers had confirmed their departure for the day after tomorrow. Plans were made, provisions discussed, routes debated. Through it all, Katherine felt a growing sense of inevitability, as if she were being carried along by a current too strong to resist. After the Hendersons departed for the night, Martha declaring that Katherine was well enough now that a chaperone wasn't strictly necessary for one night, an awkward silence fell over the cabin. Lucas busied himself banking the fire for the night while Katherine sat at the table, ostensibly mending one of her new dresses but actually watching him surreptitiously. "Mr. Yates," she said suddenly, setting down her sewing, "may I ask you something?" Lucas straightened, turning to face her. "Of course. Why did you offer to take me to Austin? The truth, please." The directness of her question caught him off guard. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of his discomfort. "It seemed the right thing to do," he said finally. "You need to get to Austin, and I can help make that happen." Katherine studied his face, sensing there was more he wasn't saying. "Is that the only reason?" Lucas met her gaze, and something in his eyes made her breath catch. "No," he admitted softly, "not the only reason." The silence that followed was charged with unspoken possibilities. Katherine's heart raced as she waited for him to continue, but he seemed unable or unwilling to elaborate. "I should get some rest," she said eventually, rising from her chair. "Tomorrow will be busy with preparations." Lucas nodded, relief and disappointment warring in his expression. "Good night, Miss Wells. Good night, Mr. Yates." Katherine moved toward the curtained-off sleeping area but paused at the threshold. "Luke," he looked up, startled by her use of his shortened name. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything." Before he could respond, she slipped behind the curtain, leaving him staring after her with an expression that would have confirmed all of Martha's suspicions had the older woman been present to see it. The following day was indeed busy with preparations. Lucas checked and rechecked his wagon, ensuring it was in perfect condition for the journey. Katherine helped Martha prepare provisions: cornbread, jerky, dried fruits, and other foods that would keep well on the trail. John arrived midday with news that a telegram had arrived for Katherine from the school board in Austin, forwarded through Mr. Thornton's store. She opened it with trepidation, fearing they had given her position to someone else due to her delay. "They're still expecting me," she announced with relief after reading the brief message. "They understand about the wagon train attack and are pleased to hear I'm safe. They ask that I arrive by the 15th if possible." "That gives us plenty of time," Lucas said. "Even traveling with the Millers, we should reach Austin by the 12th at latest." The reality of her imminent departure hung over the day like a cloud, affecting everyone's mood despite the practical activity. By evening, the preparations were complete, and they gathered for what would be their last supper together before the journey. Martha had outdone herself, preparing a feast of roast chicken, corn, fresh bread, and apple pie. They ate with the hearty appetite of those who work with their hands, but conversation was subdued. As they finished the meal, John cleared his throat. "Well, I'd like to propose a toast to new friends and safe journeys." They raised their cups of coffee, lacking anything stronger. "And to whatever the future may hold," Martha added, with a significant look between Katherine and Lucas that made them both study their plates with sudden interest. After supper, the Hendersons departed earlier than usual, with transparent excuses about early chores the next day. Their matchmaking intentions were so obvious that Katherine couldn't help but smile as she waved them off from the porch. "They mean well," Lucas said beside her, amusement and embarrassment mingling in his voice. "They do," Katherine agreed. "They care for you very much. They've been like family since they moved here." Lucas leaned against the porch post, looking out at the darkening prairie. "Before that, it was just me and the livestock for company." Were you lonely? Katherine asked softly. Lucas considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness. Sometimes, mostly in winter when the days are short and the nights seem endless, he glanced at her. But I chose this life. Solitude comes with the territory. Does it have to? The words slipped out before Katherine could reconsider them. Lucas turned to face her fully, something shifting in his expression. Are you asking if I ever think about sharing this place, this life? Katherine's heart raced, but she held his gaze steadily. Perhaps I am. For a long moment Lucas said nothing, and Katherine feared she had overstepped. Then he took a step toward her, closing the distance between them. I never used to, he said, his voice low. Never saw the point in dreaming about things that seemed unlikely to happen, but lately. He trailed off, looking at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Lately. She prompted softly. Lately, I've been thinking that this cabin feels emptier than it used to, that maybe there's more to life than just surviving on my own terms. Another step closer, and now he was near enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. That maybe some people are worth changing your plans for. Katherine's throat felt tight with emotion. Lucas, I know we barely know each other, he interrupted. I know you have plans, commitments. I'm not asking you to throw those away. He took a deep breath. I just wanted you to know that if you ever decided those plans could be altered, there would be a place for you here. The sincerity in his voice undid her completely. Without conscious thought, Katherine reached up to touch his face, her fingertips brushing against his stubbled cheek. I don't know what to say, she admitted. Everything's happening so fast. Lucas covered her hand with his own, holding it against his face. You don't have to say anything now, just think about it during our journey, see if this land speaks to you the way it does to me. Katherine nodded, unable to trust her voice. Lucas slowly lowered her hand but didn't release it, their fingers intertwining as they stood together on the porch, watching the first stars appear in the darkening Texas sky. Morning came all too quickly. Katherine woke before dawn, hearing Lucas moving quietly around the cabin, preparing for their departure. She dressed quickly in one of her new dresses, grateful for its practical design and sturdy fabric. When she emerged from behind the curtain, she found the table set for breakfast, simple fare of cornbread and coffee, but prepared with care. Good morning, Lucas said, looking up from the stove. Sleep well. Well enough, Katherine replied, though in truth she had lain awake for hours, her mind churning with thoughts of Austin, of teaching, of Lucas's quiet declaration. They ate in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. As they finished, Lucas spoke without looking up from his plate. About last night, Lucas, Katherine interrupted gently, you don't need to explain or apologize. I'm glad you told me how you feel. He met her eyes then. And how do you feel? Katherine considered her answer carefully. Confused, grateful, excited, terrified. A small smile touched her lips. Sometimes all at once. Lucas nodded, understanding in his eyes. Fair enough, that's a start. They were interrupted by the arrival of the Hendersons coming to see them off. Martha immediately took charge, fussing over last-minute details while John helped Lucas load the wagon. Now remember, Martha instructed, handing Katherine a small package, this salve is for your sunburn if it starts bothering you again. And this, she pressed a second package into Katherine's hands, is for when you need a taste of home. Katherine unwrapped it to find a small jar of Martha's apple preserves. Tears sprang to her eyes at the thoughtfulness of the gift. Thank you, she said, embracing the older woman impulsively, for everything. Martha returned the hug fiercely. You come back and visit us, you hear? Whatever you decide. Katherine nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Soon the wagon was loaded, goodbyes were said, and they were on their way to town to meet the Millers. The morning was cool and clear, promising a pleasant day for travel. As they left the ranch behind, Katherine turned for one last look. The simple cabin, the corral, the garden, all of it seemed more like home than anywhere she'd been since her father's death. The realization was both comforting and unsettling. Lucas noticed her backward glance. It'll still be there, he said quietly, if you ever want to see it again. Katherine turned to him, struck by the vulnerability beneath his steady exterior. I know, she replied, and I believe I will. The Millers were waiting at the arranged meeting point on the edge of town. Jacob Miller, a solidly built man with a weathered face, his daughter Sarah, and two teenage sons who looked remarkably like their father. Introductions were made, plans confirmed, and soon they were on their way, two wagons heading southeast toward Austin, leaving Alpine and its inhabitants behind. Sarah immediately moved to ride with Katherine, eager for female companionship, while Lucas joined Jacob Miller on the lead wagon. "So," Sarah said once they were underway, "Martha Henderson tells me you were rescued by Lucas Yates after being abandoned in the Prairie. How romantic!" Katherine couldn't help but laugh at the young woman's enthusiasm. "It wasn't quite as romantic as it sounds. I was half dead and delirious when he found me." "Still," Sarah insisted, "it's like something from a novel. The handsome rancher finding a beautiful stranger in distress, nursing her back to health." "You have an active imagination, Sarah," Katherine said, though she was secretly amused by how accurately the girl had described her own fleeting thoughts. "Oh, I know Lucas is the quiet sort, not one for grand declarations," Sarah continued, undeterred. "But Martha says he's quite taken with you." Katherine felt her cheeks warm. "Martha has been very kind to me, but I think she sees what she wishes to see. Mr. Yates and I barely know each other." Sarah gave her a skeptical look. "That's not what Martha says. She says Lucas brought wildflowers for the table every day and that he wore his Sunday shirt to dinner." "We're just friends," Katherine insisted, though the words felt hollow even to her own ears. "If you say so," Sarah replied, clearly unconvinced. "But I've known Lucas Yates for 2 years, and I've never seen him offer to escort a friend all the way to Austin before." Katherine had no response to that, and Sarah, sensing her discomfort, kindly changed the subject to descriptions of the places they would pass on their journey. The first day's travel was uneventful, the weather cooperating with clear skies and moderate temperatures. They made good time, stopping at midday for a brief meal and to rest the horses, then continuing until dusk. Camp that night was a well-organized affair, with the Millers clearly experienced in trail life. Jacob and his sons set up tents for Katherine and Sarah, while Lucas prepared a fire. Everyone contributed to the evening meal, and soon they were seated around the campfire, eating stew and cornbread as stars appeared overhead. After supper, Jacob Miller produced a harmonica and played a few tunes, his sons joining in with surprisingly good voices. The impromptu concert lifted everyone's spirits, creating a sense of camaraderie that transcended their brief acquaintance. As the evening wound down, Katherine found herself seated beside Lucas on a log near the fire, slightly apart from the others. "How are you holding up?" he asked quietly. "Well enough," she replied. "It's a pleasant way to travel with good company." Lucas nodded, poking at the fire with a stick. "The Millers are good people. Jacob's wife passed 2 years ago consumption. He's raised those children largely on his own since then." "Sarah mentioned they're going to San Antonio to visit her mother's family," Katherine said. "Yes, her mother's brother has a ranch outside the city. Good man, from what I hear." They fell silent, watching the flames dance before them. Katherine was acutely aware of Lucas beside her, of the small space between them on the log, of how easy it would be to close that distance. "I should get some rest," she said eventually, reluctant but practical. "Tomorrow will be another long day." Lucas rose, offering his hand to help her up. "Sleep well, Katherine." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent a pleasant shiver through her. "You too, Lucas." Their hands lingered together a moment longer than necessary before Katherine gently withdrew hers and made her way to her tent, feeling his eyes on her back the entire way. The next 3 days followed a similar pattern: steady travel by day, companionable evenings around the campfire. Katherine found herself enjoying the journey more than she had anticipated. The landscape changed subtly as they moved east and south, the stark beauty of the Trans-Pecos giving way to the gentler rolling hills of the Edwards Plateau. Lucas and Katherine found moments to talk privately despite the constant company, brief conversations that revealed more of each other's characters and histories. She learned about his childhood in Missouri, his parents' decision to move west when he was 15, the influenza epidemic that had taken them and left him alone at 25. He learned about her privileged upbringing in Boston, her father's financial ruin, her determination to forge her own path rather than marry for security. With each passing day, Katherine felt her resolve wavering. The teaching position in Austin had seemed like salvation when she was in Boston, trapped by her father's debts and Mr. Harrington's persistent attention. But now, having experienced the open freedom of the frontier and the simple honesty of Lucas Yates, she wondered if she was trading one cage for another. On the fourth day, they reached the point where their paths would diverge, the Millers continuing southeast to San Antonio, while Lucas and Katherine would turn northeast toward Austin. "Well, this is where we part ways," Jacob Miller said as they stopped for the midday meal. "Been a pleasure traveling with you both." "Likewise," Lucas replied, shaking the man's hand firmly. "Safe journey to San Antonio." Sarah embraced Katherine warmly. "I'll miss your company," she said sincerely. "If you ever find yourself near San Antonio, you must come visit." "I will," Katherine promised, surprised by how quickly she had grown fond of the younger woman. "And you must write to me in Austin. I'll send you the address once I'm settled." As they prepared to continue their separate journeys, Jacob took Lucas aside for a private word. Katherine couldn't hear what was said, but she saw Lucas nod solemnly before clapping the older man on the shoulder. Soon the Millers were on their way, waving goodbye as they headed south. Katherine and Lucas stood watching until they disappeared from view, suddenly aware that for the first time since her rescue, they were truly alone together. "It's about 3 hours to the next good camping spot," Lucas said, breaking the silence. "We should get moving if we want to reach it before dark." Katherine nodded, climbing onto the wagon seat beside him. As they set off, she felt a curious mix of nervousness and anticipation. The propriety that had been maintained by the Millers' presence was now solely their responsibility. They rode in comfortable silence for a time, each lost in their own thoughts. The landscape grew more verdant as they traveled, with increasing numbers of trees and rolling hills replacing the open prairie. "It's beautiful country," Katherine commented as they passed through a particularly scenic valley. "Different from what I'm used to," Lucas admitted. "Greener, more trees, but beautiful in its own way." "Do you ever miss the East?" Katherine asked. "The cities, the conveniences." Lucas considered the question thoughtfully. "Sometimes I miss certain aspects, bookshops mainly, but I've found the trade-offs worthwhile. Out here, a man is judged by his actions, not his family name or his bank account." Katherine nodded, understanding perfectly. "That's part of what drew me west, the chance to be valued for my abilities rather than my social connections or lack thereof." "Is that what teaching in Austin represents to you? A fresh start?" "Yes," Katherine said slowly. "At least that's what I thought when I left Boston. Now." She trailed off, uncertain how to articulate the changes in her perspective. "Now," Lucas prompted gently. Katherine turned to look at him directly. "Now I'm not sure what I'm running toward, only what I'm running from, and I'm beginning to wonder if that's enough reason to keep running." The implications of her words hung between them, unspoken but understood. Lucas kept his eyes on the road ahead, but his hands tightened slightly on the reins. "What would be enough reason to stop?" he asked, his voice low. Katherine's heart raced at the directness of the question. "Something worth building a life around," she answered honestly. "Something that feels like home." Lucas nodded slowly. "And does Austin feel like that to you? A place you could call home?" "I don't know," Katherine admitted. "I've never been there." The corner of Lucas's mouth quirked up. "Fair point." They lapsed into silence again, the only sounds the creak of the wagon and the steady clop of the horses' hooves. Katherine found herself studying Lucas's profile, noting the strength in his jawline, the tiny lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of squinting against the Texas sun, the gentle way he handled the horses. What would it be like, she wondered, to build a life with such a man? To wake each morning in that small cabin, to work alongside him, to share quiet evenings by the fire. The vision was powerfully appealing, yet terrifying in its unfamiliarity. By late afternoon, they reached the camping spot. Lucas had mentioned, a small clearing near a creek, sheltered by cottonwood trees. It was an ideal location, providing water, firewood, and natural protection from the elements. They worked together efficiently to make camp, falling into a comfortable routine established during their days with the Millers. Lucas tended to the horses while Katherine gathered firewood and started preparing their evening meal. As darkness fell, they sat beside the campfire, eating the stew Katherine had prepared and watching the flames dance before them. The night was mild, with a gentle breeze rustling the leaves overhead and a chorus of crickets providing natural music. "I've been thinking," Lucas said suddenly, breaking the companionable silence, "about what you said earlier, about needing something worth building a life around." Katherine looked at him expectantly, her heart beating faster. "I can't promise you the comforts of city life," he continued, his voice steady despite the gravity of his words. "I can't offer fancy parties or theater outings or whatever else you might have had in Boston, but I can offer you a partnership, a life where your thoughts and contributions matter. A home that would be as much yours as mine." He turned to face her directly, his blue eyes reflecting the firelight. "I'm not asking for an answer now. I want you to see Austin, to be sure of your choice, whatever it may be. But I need you to know that there's a place for you in Alpine if you want it. With me." Katherine's throat tightened with emotion. It wasn't a proposal exactly, not yet, but it was an offer of a future together, one she found herself desperately wanting to accept. "Lucas," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, but he shook his head gently. "You don't need to say anything tonight. Just promise me you'll think about it, truly think about it, before you make any final decisions in Austin." Katherine nodded, tears pricking at her eyes. "I promise." Lucas reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and took her hand in his. His palm was calloused from years of ranch work, but his touch was gentle as his fingers intertwined with hers. They sat that way for a long time, hands joined, watching the fire burn down to embers, each contemplating a future that suddenly seemed filled with new possibilities. The next morning dawned clear and warm, promising another pleasant day for traveling. Katherine woke early, emerging from her small tent to find Lucas already up, tending to the horses and preparing coffee over a freshly built fire. "Good morning," he greeted her, his smile warming her more effectively than the morning sun. "Good morning," she replied, suddenly shy after the intimacy of their conversation the previous night. They ate a simple breakfast, packed their camp efficiently, and were on their way as the sun rose fully above the horizon. According to Lucas's calculations, they would reach Austin by late afternoon if they maintained a steady pace. As they traveled, Katherine found herself increasingly torn. The city that had represented her salvation just a week ago now loomed as a decision point, a crossroads where she would have to choose between the life she had planned and the one that had unexpectedly opened before her. "Tell me about your teaching experience," Lucas said, seeming to sense her inner turmoil. "What subjects do you enjoy most?" Grateful for the distraction, Katherine shared her love of literature and history, her belief in education as a path to greater opportunity, her hopes for her students in Austin. Lucas listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions that revealed his own appreciation for learning. "You'd make an excellent teacher," he commented when she finished. "Any school would be fortunate to have you." "Thank you," Katherine said sincerely, "though I confess I'm nervous about the reality of managing a frontier classroom. Boston schools are quite different, I imagine." Lucas nodded. "Different challenges, certainly, but children are children everywhere. They respond to kindness, firm boundaries, and genuine interest in their welfare." "You sound like you speak from experience," Katherine observed. A slight smile curved Lucas's lips. "I helped establish the school in Alpine 2 years ago. We rotate teaching duties among those with education. Currently, Miss Abernathy handles most classes, but I still teach reading to the youngest children once a week." This revelation surprised Katherine. "You never mentioned that." Lucas shrugged modestly, never came up in conversation. You continue to surprise me, Mr. Yates, Katherine said, shaking her head in wonder. Ranch owner, rescuer, teacher. Jack of all trades, master of none, Lucas replied with a self-deprecating smile. Out here you learn to adapt. I think you undersell yourself, Katherine said seriously. From what I've seen, you've mastered quite a lot. A faint color touched Lucas's cheeks at her praise, and he turned his attention back to the road ahead. As midday approached, the landscape began to show increasing signs of settlement, more farms, better maintained roads, occasional travelers passing in the opposite direction. They stopped briefly to rest the horses and eat a cold lunch before continuing their journey. By late afternoon, just as Lucas had predicted, the outskirts of Austin came into view. Katherine felt her heart rate increase as they approached the city that had figured so prominently in her plans for the future. Austin in 1875 was a growing frontier city, its streets busier and buildings more substantial than Alpine, though still modest compared to eastern metropolises. The state capital dominated the skyline, its construction still in progress but already impressive. It's larger than I expected, Katherine commented as they drove through the outskirts. It's grown considerably since it became the permanent capital, Lucas replied. Still small compared to Boston, I imagine. Yes, but lively. Katherine watched the activity around them with interest, merchants calling their wares, children playing in side streets, women in modest frontier fashion going about their business. Where's the school? She asked, her professional curiosity awakening. East side of town, I believe, Lucas said. But first, we should find Mr. Collins and retrieve your belongings. His message said he was staying at the Driscoll Hotel. They made their way to the hotel, a newly constructed building that represented Austin's growing prosperity. Lucas helped Katherine down from the wagon, his hands lingering briefly at her waist. Shall we? He asked, offering his arm with formal courtesy that seemed at odds with his frontier appearance but entirely in keeping with his character. Katherine placed her hand on his arm, drawing strength from his solid presence as they entered the hotel lobby. The clerk directed them to a private dining room where, he informed them, Mr. Collins was hosting a dinner for the remaining members of the wagon train. They found a group of about 15 people seated around a long table, the meal well underway. A portly man at the head of the table rose as they entered, his face lighting with recognition and relief. Miss Wells, he exclaimed, thank God you're safe. All conversation ceased as every head turned toward them. Katherine felt a momentary discomfort at being the center of attention, but stepped forward with as much dignity as she could muster. Mr. Collins, she greeted him. Yes, thanks to Mr. Yates, I am indeed safe. Collins hurried around the table to take her hands in his. When we couldn't find you, when you weren't at the wagon, I feared the worst. I tried to follow the wagon train on foot, Katherine explained, but I lost the trail and became disoriented in the heat. She was severely dehydrated when I found her, Lucas added, his voice carrying a hint of reproach. Another few hours in that sun and she wouldn't have survived. Collins had the grace to look ashamed. We searched for nearly a day before moving on. I left 2 men behind to continue looking. He glanced at Lucas. And you are, Lucas Yates. I have a ranch near Alpine. Recognition dawned in Collins's eyes. You're the one who sent word through Alpine that she was safe. Lucas nodded. Miss Wells needed time to recover before traveling. Of course, of course. Collins turned back to Katherine. Your trunk is upstairs, my dear, all your possessions intact as promised, and the school board has been notified of your survival. They are most eager to meet you. Katherine felt a strange reluctance at this news. Her goal was within reach, yet she found herself wanting to delay the inevitable meeting to postpone the decision that would shape her future. That's very kind, she said automatically. I would like to refresh myself before meeting anyone if possible. Certainly, certainly, Collins agreed. I've taken the liberty of reserving a room for you here at the hotel just until you find more permanent lodgings. Lucas, who had been standing silently beside Katherine, spoke up. I'll help bring Miss Wells's trunk to her room then. Collins looked momentarily surprised, as if just registering that this rough-looking rancher intended to remain involved in Katherine's affairs. Yes, well, that would be helpful, I suppose. I'll have someone show you the way. A bellboy was summoned to guide them to Catherine's trunk and then to her room. As they followed the young man up the stairs, Lucas leaned closer to speak quietly in Catherine's ear. Are you all right? You seem distant suddenly. Catherine appreciated his perceptiveness. Just overwhelmed, she admitted. Everything's happening so quickly now. Lucas nodded, understanding in his eyes. One step at a time. The bellboy led them to a storage room where Catherine's trunk had been placed, then Lucas carried it easily to the room that had been prepared for her. It was a modest but comfortable space, with a real bed, a washstand, and a small desk near the window. When the bellboy had departed, Catherine stood in the center of the room, suddenly uncertain. The reality of Austin, of her teaching position, of the decision before her, pressed down with unexpected weight. Lucas set the trunk down carefully, then straightened to face her. What happens now is entirely up to you, he said quietly. I meant what I said by the campfire. I want you to be sure of your choice, whatever it may be. Catherine looked at him. This man who had saved her life in more ways than one, who had shown her kindness without expectation, who had offered her a future she had never imagined for herself. I don't know what to do, she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. I've been working toward this position for months, dreaming of the independence it would bring, but now there's another option, Lucas finished for her, one you hadn't considered before. Catherine nodded, unable to articulate the tumult of emotions inside her. Lucas crossed the room to stand before her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him but not touching her. I need to find lodging for the night and stables for the horses, he said. Then I thought I might call on you for dinner if you're agreeable. We could talk more then. I'd like that, Catherine said, relief washing through her at this small reprieve, this postponement of final decisions. 7 o'clock, Lucas suggested. 7 o'clock, she confirmed. With a slight bow that seemed incongruous with his frontier appearance yet perfectly natural to his character, Lucas departed, leaving Catherine alone in the hotel room that somehow felt both luxurious and confining after days under open skies. She moved to the window, watching as Lucas emerged onto the street below, leading the horses and wagon toward the nearby livery stable. Even from this distance, she could recognize the confidence in his stride, the natural authority in his bearing. What would it mean to choose him, to choose Alpine over Austin? To build a life in that small frontier community rather than pursuing the independent existence she had envisioned in this growing city? Would she be trading one form of dependence for another, or finding a true partnership with a man who seemed to value her mind as much as her company? Catherine turned from the window, facing the practical needs of the moment. She opened her trunk, finding her possessions indeed intact as promised. After days in borrowed and hastily purchased clothing, the sight of her own dresses, albeit wrinkled from travel, was welcoming. She selected a blue dress that had always been one of her favorites, its style modest but becoming. After washing away the dust of travel and arranging her hair as best she could without assistance, Catherine felt more herself than she had in days. A knock at the door revealed Mr. Collins, come to inquire after her comfort and to inform her that the school board wished to meet her the following morning at 10 o'clock. They're quite eager to welcome you, my dear, he said, beaming with the satisfaction of a man who has fulfilled his obligations. After all the uncertainty, it will be a relief to see you properly settled. Thank you, Mr. Collins, Catherine replied, maintaining the polite facade expected of her while internally feeling increasingly uncertain about her path forward. I appreciate all your efforts on my behalf. Collins departed after extracting a promise that she would join the remaining wagon party for breakfast the next morning. Catherine was relieved to see him go, finding his ebullient personality taxing after the straightforward simplicity of Lucas's company. As 7 o'clock approached, Catherine found herself growing nervous in a way she hadn't experienced since her first formal dance in Boston society. She checked her appearance repeatedly, adjusted and readjusted her hair, and paced the small room with increasing agitation. When the knock finally came, precisely at 7, she took a deep breath before opening the door. Lucas stood in the hallway, and Catherine's breath caught at the sight of him. He had clearly made an effort with his appearance. His hair was neatly combed, his face cleanly shaved, and he wore a suit that, while not fashionable by Eastern standards, fit him well and lent him an air of dignity that complemented his natural presence. "Good evening, Miss Wells," he greeted her formally, though his eyes held a warmth that belied the formality of his words. "You look beautiful." Katherine felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "Thank you, Mr. Yates. You look quite handsome yourself." A slight color touched Lucas's cheeks at her compliment. "I thought we might dine at the hotel restaurant if that's acceptable. I'm told the food is quite good." "That sounds lovely," Katherine agreed, accepting the arm he offered. The hotel restaurant was elegant by frontier standards, with white tablecloths, proper silverware, and attentive service. They were shown to a table near a window overlooking the main street, now lit by gas lamps as evening settled over the city. After they were seated and had placed their orders, a slightly awkward silence fell between them. The formal setting seemed to have imposed a constraint that hadn't existed during their journey. "This is quite different from our campfire meals," Katherine commented, attempting to break the tension. Lucas smiled, visibly relaxing. "Indeed, though I find I miss the stars overhead." "As do I," Katherine admitted, surprising herself with the realization. "There's something comforting about the open sky." "It's one of the things I love most about ranch life," Lucas said. "No matter how difficult the day, the stars remain constant, putting everything into perspective." Their conversation flowed more naturally after that, moving from observations about Austin to reminiscences of their journey together. By the time their meals arrived, they had recaptured some of the easy companionship they had developed on the trail. As they ate, Katherine found herself studying Lucas surreptitiously, noting how comfortably he handled himself in this more formal setting despite his frontier background. His manners were impeccable, his conversation intelligent and thoughtful. She could easily imagine introducing him to Boston society without embarrassment, not that such a thing was likely to occur. "You're very quiet suddenly," Lucas observed. "Second thoughts about your arrival in Austin?" Katherine smiled at his perceptiveness. "Not exactly, more like trying to reconcile different possibilities." Lucas nodded, understanding in his eyes. "It's a significant decision. Your future happiness depends on it." "Yes," Katherine agreed. "Though I'm beginning to think happiness might depend less on location than on other factors." "Such as?" Lucas prompted gently. Katherine met his gaze directly. "Such as finding someone who sees you clearly and values what they see, as Martha so wisely put it." A slow smile spread across Lucas's face, lighting his blue eyes with warmth. "Martha has surprising wisdom for someone who claims her only talents lie in cooking and gardening. She underestimates herself," Katherine said. "As do you, I think." "How so?" "You present yourself as just a simple rancher, but you're far more. You teach children to read, you build communities, you read Shakespeare, you rescue strangers and expect nothing in return." Katherine's voice softened. "You see people for who they truly are, not what society expects them to be." Lucas looked momentarily discomfited by her praise, then said simply, "I try to live honestly. It seems the least a person can do." "It's more than most manage," Katherine replied, "and it's one of the things I've come to admire most about you." The word admire seemed inadequate for the complex emotions she felt, but it was as much as she dared express in such a public setting. Lucas seemed to understand the depth behind her words, however, for his eyes darkened with an intensity that made her heart race. "Katherine," he began, his voice low, "I know we've known each other only a short time," but he was interrupted by the arrival of their dessert apple pie that, while undoubtedly excellent, Katherine found herself resenting for its poor timing. By the time the server had departed, the moment had passed, and Lucas seemed to reconsider whatever he had been about to say. They finished their meal with conversation that, while pleasant, carefully avoided the deeper currents running between them. As they prepared to leave the restaurant, Lucas asked, "Would you care for a short walk?" The evening is mild, and I thought you might enjoy seeing a bit more of Austin before tomorrow's meeting. I'd like that very much, Katherine agreed, eager to prolong their time together. They strolled along Austin's main street, observing the mix of frontier practicality and growing sophistication that characterized the developing capital city. Lucas pointed out various landmarks, sharing what limited knowledge he had of the city from his occasional visits. As they walked, their hands brushed accidentally, sending a spark of awareness through Katherine. The next time it happened, Lucas gently captured her fingers in his, looking at her questioningly. In response, Katherine threaded her fingers more securely through his, a small act of intimacy that felt momentous in its implications. They continued their walk hand in hand, speaking little but communicating much through that simple connection. When they finally returned to the hotel, both were reluctant for the evening to end. "Thank you for dinner," Katherine said as they stood outside her door, "and for the walk. It was lovely to see more of Austin." "My pleasure," Lucas replied, still holding her hand. "What time is your meeting tomorrow?" 10 o'clock. Mr. Collins is escorting me to the school." Lucas nodded, a shadow crossing his face at the mention of the wagon master. "I should let you rest then. Tomorrow will be an important day for you." Katherine felt the weight of his unspoken question: would she take the teaching position as planned, or would she choose a different path? She herself still didn't know the answer. "Lucas," she began, then faltered, unsure how to express the tumult of her feelings. He saved her from having to find the words by raising her hand to his lips and pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Whatever you decide," he said softly, "know that these past days have been the most meaningful of my life." The simple sincerity of his statement brought tears to Katherine's eyes. On impulse, she rose on tiptoe and pressed a brief, chaste kiss to his cheek. "Good night, Lucas," she whispered. "Good night, Katherine," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. She slipped into her room, closing the door behind her with a racing heart and a mind more confused than ever. How could she possibly choose between the future she had planned and the one that had unexpectedly opened before her? Both represented forms of independence, but in very different ways. One offered professional fulfillment and self-sufficiency. The other promised partnership, connection, and a different kind of freedom altogether. Sleep came fitfully that night, her dreams a confused mixture of classroom scenes and prairie vistas, of proper Boston suitors and a certain blue-eyed rancher who had captured her heart with his quiet strength and unexpected depth. Morning arrived all too quickly. Katherine dressed with care in her most professional attire, a high-necked navy dress with modest trim that conveyed competence and respectability. Her meeting with the school board would determine whether the position she had traveled so far to obtain was still hers for the taking. Breakfast with the wagon party was a boisterous affair, with multiple conversations happening simultaneously around the long table. Katherine participated politely, but found her thoughts continually drifting to Lucas. Had he slept well? What was he doing this morning? Would he wait for her decision, or had he already begun the long journey back to Alpine, assuming she would choose the path she had originally set for herself? Mr. Collins escorted her to the school at the appointed time, chattering enthusiastically about the growing educational opportunities in Austin. Katherine listened with half an ear, her mind still wrestling with the decision before her. The school itself was a substantial building by frontier standards, 2 stories, recently painted, with a bell tower and separate entrances for boys and girls. Inside, they were shown to a meeting room where 5 individuals awaited them, 3 men and 2 women, all dressed with the formal propriety befitting their positions on the school board. Introductions were made, and Katherine found herself subjected to a thorough if polite interrogation about her educational background, teaching philosophy, and personal character. She answered thoughtfully, drawing on her training and genuine passion for education, yet feeling strangely detached from the proceedings, as if watching herself from a distance. The board members seemed impressed by her responses, exchanging approving glances as the interview progressed. Finally, the chairman, a dignified gentleman named Mr. Patterson, leaned forward with a smile. Miss Wells, we are most pleased to formally offer you the position of teacher for our intermediate students, ages 9 to 12. The term begins in 2 weeks with a salary of $40 per month, plus lodging in the teacherage adjacent to the school. Do you accept? This was the moment of decision. Katherine looked at the expectant faces before her, feeling the weight of her choice pressing down. The position was exactly what she had sought: respectable, independent, allowing her to support herself through meaningful work. Yet the thought of accepting brought no joy, only a hollow ache in her chest. Mr. Patterson, members of the board, she began carefully, I am honored by your offer and impressed by your commitment to education in Austin. However, I find I must ask for 24 hours to consider my response. Surprise registered on several faces. Mr. Collins looked particularly startled by her hesitation. Miss Wells, he sputtered, this is the position you traveled so far to obtain. I understand that, Mr. Collins, Katherine replied steadily, and I do not make this request lightly. Recent events have given me new perspectives to consider, and I believe such an important decision deserves careful thought. Mr. Patterson studied her for a moment, then nodded. Thoughtfulness is a quality we value in our teachers, Miss Wells. We shall await your response tomorrow morning. Though I must inform you that if you decline, we will need to offer the position to our second-choice candidate immediately as the term approaches. I understand completely, Katherine assured him, and I appreciate your accommodation. The meeting concluded cordially, with arrangements made for Katherine to tour the school and teacherage despite her hesitation about accepting the position. She found both facilities well-maintained and adequately equipped, though the teacherage, a small 2-room cottage behind the school, felt confining after the open spaces of the Prairie. Mr. Collins accompanied her back to the hotel, clearly perplexed by her reluctance to immediately accept the position. I don't understand you, Miss Wells, he said as they walked. This is what you wanted, is it not? A respectable position, independence, a fresh start away from Boston. Yes, it is what I wanted, Katherine agreed, but perhaps what we want and what will truly bring us happiness are not always the same thing. Collins shook his head, baffled. Well, it's your decision, of course, though I must say, after all the trouble of getting you here. I understand your frustration, Mr. Collins, Katherine said diplomatically, and I appreciate all you've done on my behalf. I simply need time to be certain. When they reached the hotel, Katherine excused herself and went directly to her room, needing solitude to sort through her thoughts. She stood by the window, looking out at the bustling street below, watching people go about their business in this growing frontier city. Austin offered everything she had thought she wanted: civilization, opportunity, independence. The teaching position was respectable and would provide sufficient income for her needs. She would be her own woman, beholden to no one, free from the pressures that had driven her from Boston. Yet as she contemplated this future, she felt not excitement but a profound emptiness. The thought of living alone in the teacherage, of days filled with lessons and evenings spent in solitary reading, no longer appealed as it once had. She had experienced something on the Prairie, something unexpected and profound that had altered her perception of what truly mattered. A knock at her door interrupted her reverie. Her heart leaped with hope that it might be Lucas, but when she opened the door, she found a young hotel employee holding a letter. Message for you, madam, the boy said, handing her an envelope. Katherine thanked him and closed the door before opening the missive. Her hands trembled slightly as she recognized Lucas's handwriting. Katherine, the letter began without formal address, I find myself unable to leave Austin without making my feelings absolutely clear, without any ambiguity that might lead to regret on either side. I love you. It seems impossible that such a profound sentiment could develop in so short a time, yet I cannot deny the truth of it. In the days since I found you on the Prairie, you have become essential to me in ways I never anticipated. I understand that you came west seeking independence, not attachment, and I would never ask you to abandon that goal. What I offer instead is partnership, a sharing of lives, of work, of dreams. The ranch would be yours as much as mine, your thoughts and contributions valued equally. I will remain in Austin until tomorrow noon, staying at the Frontier Inn on Congress Avenue. If you wish to speak with me before I depart, I will be there. If not, I will understand and will carry the memory of our time together as one of the greatest gifts of my life. Whatever you decide, I wish you every happiness. Yours, Lucas. Katherine read the letter twice, then pressed it to her heart, tears blurring her vision. The simple directness of his declaration, so characteristic of the man himself, moved her deeply. There was no manipulation, no pressure, only honest emotion and respect for her choice, whatever it might be. In that moment, with perfect clarity, Katherine knew her decision was made. The teaching position, once so desperately desired, now seemed a poor substitute for the life Lucas offered, not a life of dependence, but one of true partnership with a man who valued her mind, her spirit, and her heart. She changed quickly into her riding outfit, determined to find Lucas immediately rather than wait for morning. The Frontier Inn was only a few blocks away, according to the hotel clerk who gave her directions. Katherine walked quickly through the streets of Austin, her heart pounding with anticipation and certainty. When she reached the modest inn, she paused only briefly to gather her courage before entering and asking for Lucas Yates. The innkeeper directed her to a small sitting room off the main entrance, where Lucas sat alone, reading a newspaper. He looked up as she entered, surprise giving way to hope as he rose quickly to his feet. "Katherine," he said, his voice catching slightly on her name. She crossed the room without hesitation, stopping directly before him. "I received your letter," she said simply. And, his eyes searched hers, vulnerable yet hopeful. In response, Katherine placed her hands on his chest, rose on tiptoe, and pressed her lips gently to his. The kiss was brief but filled with promise, and when she drew back, Lucas was looking at her with such joy that her heart seemed to expand in her chest. "I love you too," she said, the words coming easily now that she had accepted their truth. "And I choose you, Lucas Yates. I choose us." Lucas exhaled sharply as if he had been holding his breath. His arms came around her waist, drawing her closer. "You're certain the teaching position is not where my heart lies," Katherine finished for him. "I came west seeking independence, but I've found something far more precious, someone who sees me truly and values what he sees." Lucas smiled at her use of Martha's words. "She'll be insufferably pleased with herself when she hears." Katherine laughed, joy bubbling up inside her. "She deserves to be." She saw what we were both too cautious to admit. Lucas's expression grew serious. "It won't always be easy, Katherine. Ranch life is demanding, and Alpine is no Austin when it comes to amenities." "I know," she assured him, "but we'll face those challenges together." And perhaps, a new thought occurred to her. Perhaps Alpine needs a teacher as well. Lucas's eyes lit with understanding. "It does, as a matter of fact. Miss Abernathy has been trying to retire for 2 years, but the town council hasn't found a suitable replacement." "Well," Katherine said with a smile, "perhaps they've just found one." Lucas cupped her face gently in his hands. "You continue to amaze me, Katherine Wells." "As you do me, Lucas Yates," she replied softly. This time when they kissed, it was with the certainty of a shared future, of challenges faced together, of a love born in the harshest circumstances but promising to flourish in the life they would build side by side. The journey back to Alpine took 5 days, filled with conversation, laughter, and growing certainty that they had made the right choice. Katherine had met with the Austin School Board to decline their offer, explaining her change of plans with a quiet confidence that left no room for argument. Mr. Collins had been bewildered but ultimately accepting, especially when he learned that her decision involved not just a teaching position in Alpine but a marriage as well. They arrived in Alpine on a bright autumn afternoon, the town appearing even more welcoming to Katherine's eyes than it had on her first visit. Word of their engagement had somehow preceded them, likely via telegraph from one of Mr. Thornton's many correspondents, and they were greeted with congratulations and good-natured teasing as they made their way through town. Martha and John Henderson were waiting at Lucas's ranch, Martha practically vibrating with excitement as the wagon approached. She enveloped Katherine in a crushing embrace before the younger woman had fully descended from the wagon. "I knew it," she crowed triumphantly. "Didn't I say, John? Didn't I tell you they were perfectly suited?" John rolled his eyes good-naturedly. "You've mentioned it approximately 50 times since they left, dear. I believe the entire county is aware of your matchmaking prowess." Lucas laughed, clapping John on the shoulder. "She deserves her moment of triumph. Without her wisdom, I might never have found the courage to speak my heart. And without her salve, I might have died of sunburn before you had the chance," Katherine added with a smile, linking her arm through Lucas's. The four of them entered the cabin together, and Katherine was struck by how different it felt now, not a temporary shelter, but home, or soon to be. Already she could envision the changes they would make together, the books they would add to the shelves, the life they would build within these walls and beyond them. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Katherine was introduced to the town council and offered the teaching position at the Alpine school, which she accepted with enthusiasm. Wedding preparations moved forward, with Martha taking charge of most details, while Katherine divided her time between setting up her classroom and learning the basics of ranch management from Lucas. They were married on the first day of October, in a simple ceremony attended by most of Alpine's residents. Katherine wore a new dress of pale blue silk that Martha had helped her select, and Lucas wore his best suit with a new shirt purchased specially for the occasion. John Henderson gave the bride away, and Martha sobbed happily throughout the entire ceremony. Their wedding night was a revelation of tenderness and passion as they discovered each other fully for the first time. Katherine, who had approached this aspect of marriage with some trepidation, found herself overwhelmed by the gentle care Lucas showed her, by how perfectly they seemed to fit together, by the depth of connection that transcended the physical. Afterward, lying in his arms as moonlight filtered through the cabin window, Katherine marveled at the journey that had brought her to this place, this man, this life. "What are you thinking?" Lucas asked softly, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "I'm thinking that being left in the prairie heat was the best thing that ever happened to me," she replied, snuggling closer against him. "As terrible as it was at the time." Lucas pressed a kiss to her forehead. "I thank God every day that I found you when I did." "As do I," Katherine murmured, her eyes growing heavy with contented sleep. "As do I." 1 year later, Katherine Yates stood on the porch of the expanded cabin, watching as Lucas worked with the new colt in the corral nearby. The autumn sun gilded his hair and bronzed his skin, and her heart still skipped when he looked up and smiled at her, as if sensing her gaze. The past year had brought changes to the ranch and to Alpine itself. The school had flourished under Katherine's guidance, with enrollment increasing enough to require a second teacher. The cabin had been expanded to include a proper bedroom and a small study where Katherine prepared her lessons, and Lucas kept the ranch accounts. Most significant of all was the tiny bundle sleeping peacefully in the cradle that Lucas had crafted with his own hands, their son, James, born just 3 weeks earlier. Katherine placed a gentle hand on the cradle, watching the rhythmic rise and fall of the baby's chest, overwhelmed yet again by the miracle of his existence. Lucas finished his work with the colt and approached the porch, his smile widening as he took in the sight of his wife and son. "How are my 2 favorite people this fine afternoon?" he asked, climbing the steps to join them. "Wonderfully well," Katherine replied, accepting his kiss with a contented sigh. "James has been sleeping soundly, and I've managed to grade all of yesterday's arithmetic papers." Lucas peered into the cradle, his expression softening as it always did when he looked at their son. "He has your eyes," he observed, not for the first time, "and your stubborn chin," Katherine countered with a smile. It was a familiar exchange, each of them finding traces of the other in their child's features. Lucas settled onto the porch swing beside Katherine, his arm coming naturally around her shoulders as she leaned against him. They sat in comfortable silence for a time, watching the sun begin its descent toward the western horizon, painting the prairie in shades of gold and amber. Any regrets? Lucas asked quietly, a question he still posed occasionally, as if to reassure himself that she was truly content with the life they had built. Katherine turned to face him, cupping his cheek in her palm. "Not one," she said with absolute certainty. "This life with you, with James, with our work and our community, it's more than I ever dreamed possible." Lucas turned his head to press a kiss to her palm. "Even when the roof leaks and the students are restless and the baby keeps us up all night," Katherine laughed softly. "Even then." "Perhaps especially then, because those challenges are ours to face together." "Together," Lucas echoed, the word a promise renewed daily in large and small ways. In the cradle, James stirred and made a small sound that might soon become a cry. Katherine and Lucas exchanged a smile of perfect understanding, one born of love, of shared purpose, of a future they continued to build side by side, day by day, beneath the vast Texas sky that had first brought them together. As the sun set on another day on their ranch, Katherine reflected on the strange twists of fate that had led her here from Boston society to the brink of death on the prairie to this life of purpose and love. What had once seemed a disaster had proved to be the beginning of everything that mattered. Lucas lifted the now awakening James from his cradle, cradling his son with the same gentle strength that had once carried Katherine to water when she was lost and delirious. She watched them, father and son, her heart full to overflowing with gratitude for the cowboy who had found her in the prairie heat and carried her not just to water, but to home.